Welcome again to our near-death experience interview series. I'm Suzanne Mays. Robert and I have researched near-death experiences for the past 15 years. We are interviewing people who have had an NDE and who have also received visions of future world events. This series is part of our research project, which was approved by the Academic and Research Committee of IANS, the International Association for Near-Death Studies. In these interviews, we're exploring NDErs' insights into the deeper meaning of the challenges currently facing humanity, such as the pandemic, the current social and economic challenges, and the political polarization of our society. What advice do NDErs have for coping with and responding to these challenges? We'll pause here to bring in today's guest.
We are here again with Rabbi Stephen Robbins of Congregation Neve Shalom in Los Angeles. He is also co-founder of the Academy for Jewish Religion, California, the first trans-denominational rabbinic and cantorial school. Stephen is also a clinical psychologist with a specialty in psychoneuroimmunology of trauma, which brings together the spiritual, the physical, and brain development to help patients respond to trauma. Stephen has had a total of 7 NDEs in his life. During each NDE, he received a prophetic vision, a message, or a mission, which we now wish to explore. Welcome, Rabbi Robbins.
Thank you again for having me return and to share so much of the experience I've had that I've never been able to speak about before. You have really helped me find a way to language what the experiences I've had.
Thank you. Thank you. This is our pleasure.
So Stephen, your first NDE occurred at your birth in May 1944.
Yes.
You were still born, but you were revived by the doctor.
Correct.
And your second NDE occurred when you were 20 years of age in June of 1964 when you contracted hepatitis.
Yes.
And then can you, in this third NDE, describe when and how it did occur?
Can I make a comment about the Academy for Jewish Religion first?
Absolutely. Yes, please.
I was a campus rabbi, a Hillel director from 1969, 70 to 73 at the University of Cincinnati, in which I also was adjunct faculty in the psych department, and then moved to be the Hillel director at UC Berkeley, at which point I also taught classes there, as well as what was called the Graduate Theological Union, which was a consortium of Christian seminaries. And I was the only rabbi who's ever been on the faculty of a Jesuit seminary there. And in working in Hillel, you have students from all of the different denominations and backgrounds. So the question is, how do you serve them? And the more that we learned about it, the more a number of the Hillel directors began to understand that Hillel was the beginning of finding a bridge to bring students of various denominations together to talk about it. And as a result of all that work, I came together in 97 with Rabbi Stan Levy, and in 2000, along with the help of many others, Rabbi Mordechai Finley, Rabbi Mel Gottlieb, and a number of others, we opened the academy with 10 students and no money. And we're now 20 years old this June, and we are fully accredited now for 10 years, which is kind of amazing, by the Western Association for Schools and Colleges. And so I've spent much of my life not only in the teaching of mysticism and healing and psychology based on brain development and trauma, but also of the training of rabbis to serve Jews, not movements, not to teach ideologies, but to teach people. And the result has been quite salutary, and I'm very proud of that. The next NDE happens as a result of my contracting, hold on a second, contracting influenza in 1985. In those years, it was called a type A influenza, and it had the acronym, the Philippine flu, because I think that's where it originated. I got, and it was a very deep respiratory cough. And there were those who got it in which the cough lingered and lingered. So I got it in January, and my cough did not begin to abate until March, February, March. And my wife and I went to spend a weekend at a friend's condo on the beach, and I was a runner in those years. So I decided to try a little jog. Wow. And I was out running, and I came back. And just as I was coming back, I could feel my lungs somehow tear open inside. And I became very ill. And I went to a pulmonologist who ran a series of scans. And he said, your lungs have been seriously destroyed, and I'm not sure what to do. So they began a variety of different medications, and eventually I went on heavy doses of steroids. Everybody knows about prednisone. So I was on 125 milligrams of prednisone a day for years, which is what put me into severe osteoporosis in the 90s, which is why I was just about 5'10", and now, and I lost height so that I was 5'4", and other phenomena about that. Then as I was developing some kind of regimen, in 87, I caught a cold. This was in December of 87. And quickly the cold developed into this massive cough and infection. And I went into Cedars, taken in by my son. And my pulmonologist said, do not intubate him, because what will happen is his lungs will seize up and he'll never be saved. So they infused me with all kinds of bronchial dilators and prednisone and adrenaline. But I still left my body and learned what it was like to surrender breathing as one of the first major steps in an NDE, that since I couldn't breathe and struggled for breath, that as I left this world and my body, I no longer had to breathe. And that was the greatest relief I could tell you, to not need to breathe in order to sustain my consciousness. And when I went through the 5 stages, the transition, I came to the world, which is called the Otsar Neshamot, the Treasure House of Souls, where I went through my life review and all of the things that I had both done and not done. And one of the things that was said to me was that I need to begin to speak out about illnesses and about problems in society. That I had the platform, but I had not taken the movement forward to do so. So I did two things. One is I spoke out at one high holiday service about AIDS, in which I also had the head of the epidemiology department in the county supervisors and the head of hematology at UCLA. And I talked about how the only inoculation our kids were going to get was the knowledge that their parents were going to get at this presentation. And at those years, they said that there was never going to be a vaccine for this. So the inoculation was educating the children. I won't go into the details, but eventually I showed people condoms, and I showed them what it meant to use them. And I had contacted the Trojan company, who sent me cases of condoms, and we passed them out as people went out. And to the older ladies and gentlemen who were very shocked at this, I said, you may think this has nothing to do with you. And personally, it won't. But think about your grandchildren. You may be the only means by which they will be protected from getting AIDS without knowing it. And I don't want it to sound like I'm bragging, but when I finished the presentation, which was long, the congregation stood up and applauded, which, according to the senior rabbi I worked with, said he'd never seen it happen before. But we started an AIDS committee and everything worked. And in that audience, in that congregation, was a man who was the supervisor of the Beverly Hills school system, and another man who was the principal of Beverly High. And they asked me if I would be willing to come and teach to the students what I had talked about. And so I ended up doing one small group of students after another over several years. And I got feedback over the years from people who said, while their friends got AIDS and died, that they hadn't because they knew how to avoid it. And stories later came back to me about this rabbi who showed kids how to use condoms. So you never know what you start when you step forward. The other sermon I gave was about drug addiction and the stereotype that drug addiction happened in South Central LA and wasn't going on in Beverly Hills and West LA. And I began the sermon by saying, let me give you a weather report. It is snowing in Beverly Hills. It's snowing in Santa Monica. It's snowing in Encino. And everybody's looking around. And finally, I said, remember that snow is the popular word for cocaine. Yeah. And I introduced a man named Glenn Levant, who was the assistant chief of police in Los Angeles in charge of the drug unit. And I had arranged to do ride-arounds with him to learn about the whole issue of the drug traffic that was now going all through the city. And to do that, I had to become a chaplain in the police department. And I rode through many situations in which I ended up counseling the police and also the people who were arrested. And that pretty much shocked the congregation, but ended up being part of the education of all the children that went through our school. So I did a number of things like that, including the cults. And um, I, I think I mentioned the issue of Rajneesh
Yes.
on my last one. So I was always meant to kick over the boundaries,
Yeah.
to pass them and to shatter them, because the boxes and the boundaries made it possible for disease, discomfort, manipulation, uh, all kinds of prejudice to foment. And so my role in the world was at that point to kick them over and then to try and establish some form of healing, which I did in a number of different ways.
So if I may here, so your mission, you were given a mission.
Mhm.
You call it a tikkun, and
Part of my tikkun.
part of, and these are uh, also with your work that we spoke about in the last interview, that to work with the problem of cults, and then you have this work with AIDS, and basically that is a kind of activism that was inspired by your near-death experience. You were given this task,
Yes.
and
My shomrim
you
expanded to include the soul presences of others from non-Jewish sources who had died and were part of these various issues that needed to be discussed.
in Shomrim is your term for your guides or your teachers.
Yes, and my protectors are the ones who see me through all of the illnesses and the challenges I've gone through and will go through.
So you are getting this guidance from a lot of different sources that were brought to you initially through your NDE.
Correct.
And
And all of that began with the unusual quality of my birth, which said my task in the world was to do refuah, to do healing. And part of that is that where there is an infection, where there is cancer, there is something that needs to be cut open and excised and drained so that there can be an entrance of that which can heal. And whether that is something physical or psychological or spiritual, political, social, it's all in the same term, that these illnesses in society represent places in which the boundaries that we create permit an infection to grow and to destabilize all those locked in those boxes.
right, and this now is carrying forward in the current times. And so, what do you feel that you have a task now to help? How would you help people who are facing the difficulties that we now have with the pandemic and with all of this social and political polarization?
It ends up that I'm here with you and IONS, which I was told from the beginning would be, if IONS was willing to provide me a platform to speak from, if there was interest in what it is I had learned. The other is the Academy for Jewish Religion, and there are other organizations who are interested in the work I do in healing. So in personal physical healing. And then there's the book I'm writing, etc., with a doctor and the chiropractor who've been studying with me for years. So part of the reason I was returned in 2018 and now is that I'm obligated to take everything I've learned and applied and make sure it's saved and preserved so that when I die, I don't take it with me.
Right, right.
And you two and IONS are providing a platform for me to articulate what it is I've learned and come to receive and develop, but not about me. It's not about my importance. It is about how each of us have some service to do. Robert and Suzanne, you have done such an incredible service to humanity with the work you've done with IONS by developing this sophisticated phenomenology by which people can take a look at their own individual near-death experience and find the places where they fit. And I've used your phenomenology in much simpler form with people so that they understand that what they've gone through is not something that's their craziness, but
Right.
that they fit in with millions of people who've gone through similar experience. So you are part of this great tikkun that makes it possible for people to find a way to both understand their experience, to live with it, and to understand the transformation that lifts them beyond not only the fear of death, but the fear of anything, to move forward, to become more than they thought they could ever be.
Right. And one of the messages that we have heard from NDErs is, and I think that this may be, and I'd like your comment on it, may be a way of healing the polarization and separation of the people from one another because they feel differently, they see things differently, is to develop tolerance, to develop acceptance, to work with one another in service. In other words, to get people to overcome the barriers that both sides have set up against the other.
You know, one of the most important lessons that I learned about NDEs in the 60s was that once we leave this physical reality, that race, religion, cultural bias all disappear.
Right.
And that these limitations are part of the challenges we have in this world to transcend what we see with our eyes to what we see with our inner vision, so that there is a comment that says, why is it that there was only one human being created at the beginning? And the comment is multiple. One of the comments is so that no one can say, my father is better than your father, because we all come from the same father. Yeah. And it goes on to raise the question that a human king mints many coins from the original, and they all come out the same. But the Holy One stamps each human being with the form of the original human, and we all come out different, teaching us that it is not what makes us the same that's important, it's what makes us unique that is precious and important. And in that comment, it says, how does God form the original Adam? And it is said that God goes to the four corners of existence and he brings back afar particles of existence that are white, red, black, brown, and yellow. This is a multi-thousand-year-old comment, and formed them all together into the first human, so that we are all only parts of each other, and it's only skin deep. But deep within, we are all built for the same purpose and principle, which is to overcome what's on the surface.
Yes.
Right, right.
This, and IONs and all the NDErs who are of every race, every ethnic background, every religion, every socioeconomic, educational system, every age, from infancy to old age, have a common message, and that is that we are all the same, coming from the same origin, but each of us is unique in our purpose for being here. And it is our uniqueness, our purpose, that is to be celebrated, not to be subdued because we look different.
Right. And yet, how do we overcome this? The racism,
The divisiveness of this country.
right?
Well, because for the first time, the aching pus-filled sore of racism, of religious bigotry, has finally been cut open.
Yeah.
And it's the NDErs who can speak out about this and say, this is illness, and we must all come together, because we've all learned that all of this is only skin deep.
Right.
We have a voice to do that for those who want to do it. I don't know if that helps to answer your question.
Very much so.
I have shared with people who are Muslim and Catholic, various forms of Christianity, people who are atheists, just scientists, and as a result of their NDEs, realize that ultimately all of that fades away until we realize that we all come from a common source, and that our unique experiences in this world teach us about what it is that we have to do in the worlds that we are destined to go to.
And you would say that common source is a source of goodness. And we would say God, but goodness.
It's a source of love.
Love.
That we are all here loved, and that the statement that we need to love each other means, love in this case means acknowledging the unlimited, infinite worth of every single human being, and that no one in this world is expendable, and that we must do everything we can to sustain life. Some of it we can't, but this coronavirus, the tearing apart of the ecology of the world, the decimation of the forests, the animals, the pollution of the seas, climate change, and then the coronavirus, and all of it subsumed under racial categories is the illness that humans have created by not loving each other, but by hating and being in competition with each other.
Right.
And all of us who have had NDEs know to speak out and to say, this must stop because this world is too beautiful to destroy.
The picture that you gave us in the last interview was that the human soul is so much greater in actuality than what appears in our physical presence in being united with this physical body.
Correct.
And the picture that I guess comes from Jewish tradition is that the soul, that the personality that is in the physical body is just the foot of the soul that fits into the shoe of the physical body.
Right. The body is a shoe for the soul's foot, which means that the vast majority of each of our souls is retained in its source to be constantly reviving that part of us that needs to be sustained in this world, and to know that when we leave here, when we finally leave the physical, that we are not lost, but we are retrieved back to what is called the ikar, the root of our soul, which is more vast and beautiful and filled with presence than we can possibly understand. And that's what I've experienced both in my coming into the world, in my first NDE, my birth, and in each of the NDEs to follow. And this last one that happened showed me this vast, almost Zoom-like image of thousands of faces in anguish, in loneliness, in tears, and in agony, all crying out to be seen, to be cared for, to be recognized, to know that they're not lost. And it is only in the hands of those of us who have had NDEs to speak out and to say, there is no life that is expendable. So that in this coronavirus throughout the world, what's happening now in the politics and the economics is the world is being set aside in competitive structures, which means only that this virus will just keep circling around, and it may dissipate at some point. We get a vaccine, but it will come around again in another iteration, the way the influenza does. And what it will take for us to survive is to commit ourselves to each other, to care for each other, because we are all part of one human family. And that human family is not the family in this world, it is the family of the origin of our souls.
Right. And so when one sees another person that one might have animus against and or fear of, that to realize that person is a spiritual being, that person is not just the physical body, but is this a spiritual being, just as you are, and that person therefore deserves love and kindness, and not harm and or fear. And what the challenge is then to reach across to the other person, recognizing that person is a spiritual being.
Exactly. I've worked with so many different people over the years in so many different racial and ethnic groups. And when I have come together people who were filled with animus and treat them with the dignity and the respect and the kindness they deserve, they're surprised.
Yeah.
I participated in a program in Cincinnati that brought the police department together with the Black neighborhoods to create a way in which they could better communicate. And I began by modeling treatment and breaking these groups down into dyads, so that a policeman and a member of the Black community sat and talked to one another and taught them how to listen rather than to think about how to answer. And it was quite an interesting transformation in which, if you just get someone you listen to then be responsible to repeat back to them what you heard, is staggering, because at that point you have to truly listen and recapitulate what they said. Right. And as time went on, they began to speak together, not just in language, but they were truly present for each other, looking eye to eye without looking away, without trying to find a memory or a thought. And these are people who were not only strangers, but hostile strangers when they started. And that's the only way we repair this damage. You can't do it with great movements. You can only do it one person at a time, one soul at a time. And we don't invest in the quality of the individual person. We only take people in big clumps and groups in which there is no capacity for connection, for presence, and for it's called dveikut, attachment. I don't know if that helps.
Yes, that helps tremendously. I think that we are about out of time, and we're trying to keep these interviews to a half an hour or so. So thank you, Stephen. And we'd like to continue this discussion in another session, and we'll go on to the next NDE, number 4. And so until then, we would like to thank you very much.
Thank you.